The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Buckingham Palace as Sergeant Michael Harrison adjusted his red tunic and checked his rifle for the third time. At 28 years old, Michael had served as a Queen's Guard for 7 years, and the routine had become second nature to him. Stand perfectly still for 2 hours, eyes forward, ignore all distractions, and never break protocol under any circumstances. The tourists were already gathering behind the black iron gates, cameras ready to capture the famous guards in their tall bearskin hats. Michael had learned to tune out their chatter, their attempts to make him smile, and their endless questions about whether the guards were real or just statues. Today felt like any other day in his military career. Michael came from a working-class family in Manchester. His father had been a factory worker, and his mother cleaned offices at night to make ends meet. Joining the army had been his ticket to a better life, and becoming a Queen's Guard was the pinnacle of his military service. The honor meant everything to him, and he took the responsibility seriously. As he took his position outside the palace gates, Michael noticed the usual crowd forming. School children on field trips pressed their faces against the iron bars, trying to get a better look at his uniform. Elderly tourists snapped photos while their guides explained the history of the guards. Street performers entertained the growing crowd with music and magic tricks, hoping to earn a few coins from the spectators. The morning progressed without incident. Michael remained motionless, his eyes fixed straight ahead, breathing steadily through his nose. His training had taught him to be aware of his surroundings without appearing to look around. He could sense movement, hear conversations, and detect any unusual activity while maintaining his stoic pose. Around midday, the crowd began to thin as people moved on to other attractions. The lunch hour brought a brief respite from the constant stream of tourists, though a few dedicated visitors remained, hoping to witness the famous changing of the guard ceremony that would take place later in the afternoon. Michael's mind wandered to his girlfriend Sarah, who worked as a nurse at a London hospital. They had been dating for 2 years, and he had been planning to propose to her next month during his leave. The engagement ring was hidden in his barracks, waiting for the perfect moment. Sarah understood the demands of his job and never complained about the long hours or the strict protocols he had to follow. A group of businessmen in expensive suits walked by, speaking loudly on their phones about important deals and meetings. Michael had observed thousands of such people over the years, all absorbed in their own worlds, barely noticing the guards who protected the monarchy. He sometimes wondered what it would be like to live such a carefree life without the weight of tradition and duty on his shoulders. The afternoon sun grew stronger, and Michael could feel sweat beginning to form under his heavy uniform. The bearskin hat, though iconic, was notoriously hot and uncomfortable during warm weather. His feet ached in his polished black boots, but he had learned to endure physical discomfort without showing any sign of distress. A school bus pulled up near the palace gates, and dozens of children poured out, their excited voices filling the air. Their teacher, a middle-aged woman with graying hair, tried to organize them into orderly lines while explaining the significance of the royal guards. Michael had always enjoyed these school visits, even though he couldn't show it. Children brought an energy and innocence to the palace grounds that reminded him why he was proud to serve. Among the group of children, Michael noticed a small girl who seemed different from the others, while her classmates chattered excitedly and pointed at his uniform. She stood quietly at the back of the group, her dark eyes scanning the area with an intensity that seemed unusual for someone so young. She couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 years old, with long brown hair tied back in a ponytail and wearing a blue school uniform that looked slightly too big for her small frame. The girl's teacher called the class to attention, beginning her lecture about the history of the Queen's Guard and their role in protecting the royal family. The children listened with varying degrees of interest, some asking questions while others fidgeted impatiently. But the quiet girl at the back remained focused, her gaze moving between Michael and something behind him that he couldn't see. As the minutes ticked by, Michael noticed that the girl's behavior was becoming increasingly agitated. She kept looking around nervously, as if searching for someone or something. Her hands were clenched into small fists at her sides, and he could see tension in her young face that didn't belong there. The teacher finished her presentation and began organizing the children for their next destination. Most of the group started moving toward the bus, but the small girl lingered behind. She approached the iron gate slowly, her eyes never leaving Michael's face. When she was close enough, she pressed herself against the bars and looked directly at him. What happened next would change Michael's life forever. The girl raised her small hand and began making deliberate gestures with her fingers. At first, Michael thought she was simply waving or trying to get his attention like many children did. But as he watched more carefully, he realized she was making specific patterns with her hands. 3 quick gestures, followed by 3 longer ones, then 3 quick ones again. Michael's blood ran cold as recognition hit him like a physical blow. The girl was flashing SOS in sign language, the international distress signal that every soldier learned during basic training. Her small fingers were desperately spelling out the letters that meant, "Help me." Michael's training had prepared him for many situations, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to help the child, but his duty as a Queen's Guard demanded that he remain motionless and silent. The conflict between his humanity and his duty created a tension that threatened to tear him apart. The girl continued her desperate signaling, her dark eyes pleading with him to understand. Tears began to form in the corners of her eyes, but she kept repeating the SOS pattern, her small hands trembling with the effort. Behind her, the teacher was calling for the stragglers to hurry up and join the group. Michael's mind raced as he tried to process what was happening. Was this child really in danger, or was she playing some kind of game? The possibility that she might be in genuine distress made his stomach clench with anxiety. But breaking protocol could end his career and bring disgrace to the regiment. The weight of his responsibility felt heavier than ever before. The little girl's desperate signaling continued, her small hands moving with increasing urgency behind the iron bars. Michael could see fear in her young eyes, a terror that no child should ever have to experience. His military training had taught him to recognize genuine distress, and every fiber of his being told him that this child was in real danger. Around them, the normal sounds of London continued. Traffic hummed in the distance. Tourists chattered in multiple languages, and street vendors called out their wares. But for Michael, the world had narrowed to focus entirely on the small girl whose silent plea for help was breaking his heart. The weight of his rifle on his shoulder suddenly felt impossibly heavy, not because of its physical mass, but because of the responsibility it represented. The girl's teacher had noticed her absence from the group and was walking back toward the gates. "Emma, come along now," she called, her voice carrying the patient but firm tone that teachers used when trying to maintain order. The child named Emma turned briefly toward her teacher, then looked back at Michael with even greater desperation. Her SOS signals became more frantic, her small hands shaking as she repeated the pattern over and over. Michael's mind raced through his options. Royal Guard protocol was crystal clear about maintaining position and remaining silent during duty. Breaking these rules wasn't just a matter of military discipline. It was about upholding centuries of tradition and maintaining the dignity of the crown. Guards had been dismissed from service for far less serious infractions. But looking at Emma's terrified face, protocol seemed like a cold and heartless set of rules that had no place in a situation involving a child's safety. The teacher reached Emma and gently took her hand. "We need to get back to the bus, sweetheart. The other children are waiting." Emma resisted slightly, still trying to maintain eye contact with Michael, her mouth moving silently as if she were trying to speak words that wouldn't come out. The teacher, oblivious to the child's distress signals, began leading her away from the gates. As they walked toward the school bus, Emma kept looking back over her shoulder at Michael. Her SOS signals had stopped, but the pleading expression in her eyes remained. Michael watched helplessly as the distance between them grew, feeling like a coward for not acting on his instincts. The rational part of his mind tried to convince him that he might have misunderstood the situation, that perhaps the child was simply playing a game or seeking attention. The school bus engine started, and Michael could see Emma's face pressed against one of the windows. Even from a distance, he could tell that she was crying. The bus began to pull away from the curb, and Michael felt a wave of panic wash over him. If this child was truly in danger, he might be her only hope for rescue. But the bus was leaving, and he was bound by duty to remain at his post. Something inside Michael snapped. All the years of training, all the emphasis on protocol and tradition suddenly seemed meaningless in the face of a child's desperate plea for help. His conscience overpowered his conditioning, and he made a decision that would define the rest of his life. Michael abandoned his position. He stepped away from his post, his heavy boots echoing on the cobblestones as he moved toward the palace entrance. The few remaining tourists looked on in shock as the supposedly motionless guard suddenly sprang into action. Some reached for their cameras, thinking they were witnessing some special ceremony or changing of the guard routine they had never seen before. Michael's commanding officer, Captain James Wilson, was conducting a routine inspection inside the palace courtyard when he heard the commotion outside. Captain Wilson was a career military man in his 50s, with a reputation for strict adherence to protocol and zero tolerance for insubordination. He had served in various conflicts around the world before accepting his current position overseeing the Queen's Guard, and he took the responsibilities of his role very seriously. When Captain Wilson emerged from the palace and saw Michael moving away from his assigned position, his face turned red with anger and confusion. In 30 years of military service, he had never seen a Queen's Guard abandon his post without permission. The breach of protocol was so severe that it could result in immediate dismissal from service and potential criminal charges. Sergeant Harrison! Captain Wilson's voice boomed across the courtyard, causing several tourists to jump in surprise. "Return to your position immediately!" The command carried all the authority of his rank and years of experience, but Michael didn't. Stop. If anything, he began moving faster, his sense of urgency overwhelming his respect for military hierarchy. Michael reached the palace entrance and spoke quickly to the duty officer, explaining about the child's distress signals and his belief that she was in danger. The duty officer, a young lieutenant named David Thompson, looked uncertain about how to handle such an unusual situation. Protocol didn't have a clear procedure for guards who claimed to have witnessed crimes while on duty. Meanwhile, Captain Wilson had reached them, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. The tourists were still watching, some filming the unprecedented scene with their phones. The incident was quickly becoming a public spectacle that would undoubtedly attract media attention and potentially embarrass the entire regiment. Sergeant Harrison, you will return to your post this instant, or I will have you arrested for desertion. Captain Wilson's voice carried across the courtyard, but Michael stood his ground. The thought of Emma's terrified face gave him strength to face his superior officer's wrath. "Sir, there's a child in danger," Michael said, his voice steady despite the gravity of his situation. "A little girl on the school bus that just left here was signaling SOS. She's in real trouble and someone needs to help her." He quickly described Emma's desperate hand signals and the fear he had seen in her eyes. Captain Wilson's expression shifted from anger to skepticism. "Are you telling me that you abandoned your post based on what you thought you saw from a child?" His tone suggested that he found the explanation ridiculous, but Michael could see a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Lieutenant Thompson spoke up hesitantly. "Sir, if there's even a possibility that a child is in danger, shouldn't we at least investigate?" The young officer was clearly uncomfortable with the situation, caught between his duty to support his superior and his concern for a potentially endangered child. The debate continued as precious minutes ticked away. The school bus carrying Emma was getting further from the palace with each passing moment, and Michael felt increasingly desperate. He knew that his career was likely over regardless of the outcome, but he couldn't live with himself if something happened to Emma because he had failed to act on his instincts. As they argued about proper procedure and protocol, none of them realized that Emma's situation was far more serious than they could have imagined. The child's desperate SOS signals had been her last hope for rescue, and Michael's decision to break protocol was about to set in motion a chain of events that would expose a horrific crime and save not just Emma's life, but the lives of several other children as well. The argument between Michael and Captain Wilson continued in the palace courtyard, drawing more attention from tourists and staff members who had never witnessed such a breach of protocol. Michael's decision to abandon his post was unprecedented in the modern history of the Queen's Guard, and the implications were staggering. Yet something in his gut told him that Emma's life might depend on his willingness to sacrifice everything he had worked for. Lieutenant Thompson pulled out his radio and contacted the palace security office. "We need to get in touch with the Metropolitan Police," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "If there's even a remote chance that a child is in danger, we need to act quickly." Captain Wilson shot him a withering look, clearly displeased with the lieutenant's support of Michael's actions, but he didn't countermand the order. Within minutes, Detective Inspector Sarah Collins from the Metropolitan Police arrived at the palace. D.I. Collins was a seasoned investigator in her 40s who specialized in crimes against children. She had seen too many cases where early warning signs were ignored, leading to tragic outcomes. Her reputation was built on taking every potential threat to a child's safety seriously, regardless of how unlikely it might seem. Michael described Emma's desperate signaling in detail, explaining how the child had deliberately positioned herself to be seen by him and had repeatedly flashed the SOS pattern with her hands. He also mentioned the fear he had seen in her eyes and how she had continued trying to signal even as her teacher led her away. D.I. Collins listened intently, asking specific questions about the child's appearance, behavior, and the timing of the incident. "Can you describe the school bus?" D.I. Collins asked, pulling out her notebook. Michael provided what details he could. Remember, a yellow school bus with blue lettering, approximately 30 children, and a middle-aged female teacher with graying hair. He also recalled that the teacher had called the child Emma, which gave them at least a first name to work with. Captain Wilson remained skeptical throughout the interview. "Detective Inspector, I must stress that Sergeant Harrison has committed a serious breach of protocol. His claims about this child could simply be an attempt to justify his inexcusable behavior." His tone suggested that he viewed the entire situation as an elaborate excuse for insubordination. D.I. Collins fixed Captain Wilson with a steady gaze. "Captain, I understand your concerns about military protocol, but my primary concern is the potential safety of a child. If Sergeant Harrison's observations are accurate, we may have a very small window of opportunity to help her." She turned back to Michael. "You're certain about what you saw?" Michael nodded emphatically. "Detective Inspector, I stake my career on it. That little girl was in genuine distress, and she was specifically trying to communicate with me. She knew the SOS signal, and she used it deliberately. Something is very wrong in her situation." The detective made several phone calls, coordinating with traffic control cameras and school district offices to track down information about the bus. London's extensive CCTV network meant that the vehicle's route could potentially be traced, but time was critical. Every minute that passed put Emma further away and potentially deeper into danger. While they waited for information, D.I. Collins questioned Michael more thoroughly about his military background and training. She learned that he had served tours of duty in Afghanistan and had been trained to recognize distress signals and signs of trauma. His experience with civilians in war zones had taught him to read body language and identify when someone was in genuine fear for their life. In your professional opinion, was this child exhibiting signs of acute distress? D.I. Collins asked. Michael's response was immediate and certain. Detective, in 7 years of military service, including combat zones, I've learned to recognize when someone is desperate for help. This child wasn't playing games or seeking attention. She was terrified, and she was running out of time. The phone call from traffic control came through with promising news. They had located the school bus on CCTV footage and were tracking its route through central London. The bus was heading toward an area in East London that was known for its mix of residential and industrial buildings. More importantly, they had identified the school district and were working to contact the school administration. However, when they reached the school that the children were supposed to be attending, they discovered something alarming. The school had no record of organizing a field trip to Buckingham Palace that day. In fact, they had no trips scheduled at all, and none of their buses were unaccounted for. The school's principal was immediately concerned and began checking with other nearby schools to see if there had been some kind of mix-up. D.I. Collins felt her stomach tighten with apprehension. A school bus full of children that wasn't connected to any legitimate educational institution was exactly the kind of situation that kept child protection officers awake at night. She immediately escalated the case, calling in additional resources and alerting specialized units that dealt with child abduction and trafficking. Michael watched as the situation unfolded, feeling a mixture of vindication and terror. His instincts had been correct about Emma being in danger, but the reality was apparently much worse than he had initially feared. The child wasn't just dealing with a domestic problem or school bullying, she was potentially the victim of an organized criminal operation. Captain Wilson's attitude began to shift as the gravity of the situation became apparent. While he still disapproved of Michael's breach of protocol, he couldn't ignore the fact that the sergeant's actions might have uncovered a serious crime. The captain contacted his superiors to brief them on the developing situation and to request guidance on how to handle the unprecedented circumstances. The CCTV tracking continued, with traffic control operators following the bus's progress through London's streets. The vehicle seemed to be heading toward a specific destination, taking a direct route that suggested the driver was familiar with the area. This wasn't a random kidnapping or a crime of opportunity. It appeared to be a planned operation with a predetermined endpoint. D.I. Collins coordinated with multiple police units, positioning them along the bus's projected route while maintaining a safe distance to avoid spooking the perpetrators. The last thing they wanted was to trigger a hostage situation that could endanger all the children on board. The operation required delicate handling and precise timing. As they prepared for what was essentially a rescue mission, Michael found himself thinking about Emma's desperate face and the courage it must have taken for such a young child to attempt to signal for help. She had somehow learned the SOS signal and had been smart enough to use it when she saw someone in uniform who might be able to help her. Her quick thinking and bravery had potentially saved not only her own life, but the lives of all the other children on that bus. The radio crackled with updates from the surveillance team. The bus had stopped at a warehouse complex in East London, and several adults had emerged from the building to meet it. The situation was about to reach its critical phase, and everyone involved knew that the next few minutes would determine whether Emma's desperate plea for help would result in rescue or tragedy. The warehouse complex in East London looked abandoned from the outside, with broken windows and weeds growing through cracks in the concrete. But the CCTV footage showed clear signs of activity around the building where the school bus had stopped. Detective Inspector Collins coordinated with armed response units, child protection specialists, and negotiation teams as they prepared for what could be a complex rescue operation. Michael remained at the palace under Captain Wilson's supervision, but D.I. Collins had requested that he stay available by phone in case his observations about Emma could provide additional insights during the operation. The weight of responsibility felt crushing as he realized that his decision to break protocol had potentially uncovered something far more sinister than he had initially imagined. The surveillance team reported that the children were being led off the bus and into the warehouse building. From their distant vantage point, they could see that the kids appeared to be moving in an orderly fashion, suggesting that they weren't yet aware of their danger. The false teacher who had accompanied them maintained her role, speaking to the children in what seemed to be a calm and reassuring manner. Commander Patricia Hayes, a veteran of the Metropolitan Police's Specialist Operations Unit, took charge of the tactical response. She had handled numerous child endangerment cases throughout her 25-year career, and she knew that operations involving multiple child victims required extraordinary care and precision. One wrong move could result in a hostage situation that could end tragically for everyone involved. The team quickly established a perimeter around the warehouse complex, positioning snipers and tactical officers at strategic points while keeping them well hidden from view. Intelligence officers worked frantically to gather information about the building's layout, identifying entry points, potential escape routes, and areas where the children might be held. Every detail could be crucial when the rescue operation began. Inside the warehouse, Emma and the other children found themselves in a large, dimly lit space, filled with makeshift partitions and furniture. The woman they had believed to be their teacher had disappeared, replaced by several adults who were clearly not educators. The children began to sense that something was wrong, and some of the younger ones started to cry. Emma had suspected something was amiss from the moment they boarded the bus that morning. The woman, claiming to be a substitute teacher, had seemed nervous and unfamiliar with basic school procedures. More importantly, Emma had recognized one of the other adults at the pickup location as someone she had seen watching children at various playgrounds and schools around London. Despite her young age, Emma was remarkably observant and intelligent. Her parents had taught her about stranger danger and the importance of trusting her instincts when something felt wrong. When she realized that they weren't actually going on a legitimate school trip, she began looking for opportunities to alert someone in authority about their situation. The moment she saw the Queen's Guard at Buckingham Palace, Emma knew she had found her chance. She had learned the SOS signal from her older brother, who was a Boy Scout, and she remembered him explaining that military personnel would recognize the distress call. Her desperate signaling to Michael had been her last hope before disappearing into what she feared might be a terrible situation. Back at the warehouse, the tactical teams received detailed intelligence about the building's interior layout from city planning records. The structure had been used for manufacturing in the past, which meant it had multiple levels, large open spaces, and numerous potential hiding spots. The complexity of the building would make the rescue operation challenging, but it also provided opportunities for tactical advantages. Commander Hayes established communication protocols and backup plans for various scenarios. The primary objective was to extract all the children safely without alerting the criminals to the police presence until the last possible moment. This meant coordinating a simultaneous breach of multiple entry points to prevent any of the perpetrators from using the children as human shields. The negotiation team remained on standby in case the operation was discovered before the tactical teams could secure the children. However, everyone hoped that the element of surprise would allow them to complete the rescue without having to enter into potentially dangerous discussions with criminals who had already demonstrated their willingness to harm children. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the warehouse district, the final preparations for the rescue operation were completed. Each team member knew their role, their entry point, and their specific objectives. The children's safety was the paramount concern, with the capture of the criminals being a secondary priority. Michael received regular updates on the operation's progress, and he found himself pacing anxiously around the palace courtyard. Captain Wilson had temporarily suspended his disciplinary action pending the outcome of the situation, recognizing that the sergeant's breach of protocol might ultimately be justified by the circumstances. The tension was unbearable as they waited for news from the tactical teams. D.I. Collins positioned herself at the command center, monitoring communications from all the units involved in the operation. She had seen too many cases where children disappeared into criminal networks, never to be seen again by their families. The fact that they had been able to track down this particular group so quickly was largely due to Michael's willingness to risk his career to help a desperate child. The warehouse surveillance team reported that the criminals appeared to be preparing to move the children to a different location within the building. This intelligence prompted Commander Hayes to accelerate the timeline for the rescue operation. They couldn't risk losing track of the children's location within the complex building structure. At 4:47 p.m., Commander Hayes gave the order to proceed with the rescue operation. Multiple tactical teams simultaneously breached different entry points of the warehouse using specialized equipment to minimize noise while maximizing their speed and effectiveness. The operation had to be executed with military precision to ensure that all the children were secured before any of the criminals could react. Emma was huddled with a group of younger children in a makeshift room when she heard the commotion beginning in other parts of the building. Despite her fear, she felt a surge of hope as she recognized the sounds of what might be a rescue operation. Her desperate SOS signals to the Queen's Guard might have actually worked, bringing help when she and the other children needed it most. Tactical teams moved through the warehouse with practiced efficiency, securing areas and accounting for both criminals and victims as they progressed toward the children's location. Radio communications crackled with updates as each team reported their progress and the status of the people they encountered. The operation was unfolding exactly as planned, but everyone knew that success wouldn't be guaranteed until every child was safely out of the building. As the rescue teams drew closer to Emma's location, she could hear adult voices shouting and the sound of heavy footsteps moving quickly through the building. The younger children were crying and clinging to each other, but Emma tried to stay calm and ready to help when the rescuers reached them. She had been brave enough to signal for help, and now she needed to be brave enough to help her fellow victims when their rescue finally arrived. The warehouse doors burst open as tactical officers in full protective gear swept into the building. The rescue operation unfolded with remarkable precision, each team executing their assigned roles flawlessly. Within minutes, they had secured the main areas of the building and located the room where Emma and 29 other children were being held. Emma's heart raced as she saw the uniformed officers approaching their makeshift prison. When the tactical team leader called out, "Metropolitan Police, you're safe now!" She felt tears of relief streaming down her face. Her desperate SOS signals to the Queen's Guard had worked. Someone had understood her plea for help and had acted on it. The children were quickly but carefully evacuated from the warehouse, with specially trained child protection officers providing immediate comfort and reassurance. Many of the kids were crying and confused, not fully understanding what had been happening to them or why they were being rescued. Social workers and medical personnel were standing by to provide immediate care and begin the process of reuniting the children with their families. As Emma was led out of the building, she asked one of the officers if she could thank the soldier, who had seen her signals at the palace. The officer, Sergeant Rebecca Martinez from the Child Protection Unit, was intrigued by the girl's request and made a note to follow up on it. Emma's composure and awareness throughout the ordeal had impressed all the professionals involved in her rescue. The investigation that followed revealed the full scope of the criminal operation that Emma's quick thinking had helped to expose. The fake school trip had been part of an elaborate child trafficking ring that had been operating in London for several months. The criminals had been systematically targeting children from various schools, using false documentation and impersonating educational staff to abduct their victims. Detective Inspector Collins led the investigation into the trafficking ring, working with international law enforcement agencies to trace connections to similar operations in other countries. The warehouse had been set up as a temporary holding facility where children were processed before being moved to other locations. The rescue had interrupted the criminals' plans and prevented what could have been a tragedy of enormous proportions. The woman who had posed as a teacher was actually Margaret Thornton, a career criminal with a history of fraud and identity theft. She had worked with the trafficking organization to develop elaborate schemes for abducting children without raising immediate suspicion from parents or schools. Her ability to impersonate educational professionals had made her particularly valuable to the criminal network. During questioning, the arrested suspects revealed that they had been planning to transport the children out of the country within 24 hours of the abduction. Emma's SOS signals and Michael's decision to break protocol had literally saved all 30 children from disappearing into an international criminal network from which they might never have been recovered. Back at Buckingham Palace, Michael faced a formal inquiry regarding his abandonment of his post. However, the circumstances surrounding his decision had created an unprecedented situation for military justice. Captain Wilson, despite his initial anger about the breach of protocol, found himself in the unusual position of having to evaluate insubordination that had directly resulted in saving children's lives. The inquiry board consisted of senior military officers and civilian oversight representatives who had to balance the importance of military discipline with the moral imperative that had driven Michael's actions. Lieutenant Thompson testified on Michael's behalf, arguing that the sergeant had demonstrated the highest values of military service by placing the protection of innocent civilians above his own career interests. The case attracted significant media attention, with news outlets around the world reporting on the Queen's Guard, who had broken centuries of protocol to save a child's life. Public opinion was overwhelmingly supportive of Michael's actions, with many people viewing him as a hero who had prioritized humanity over rigid adherence to rules. The royal family itself issued a statement supporting the Guard's decision to act on behalf of endangered children. Emma's parents, David and Catherine Morrison, requested a meeting with Michael to thank him personally for his role in their daughter's rescue. The Morrison family had been frantic with worry when Emma failed to return from what they had believed was a legitimate school trip. The fake teacher had provided convincing documentation and had even spoken with some parents to allay any concerns about the outing. During the emotional meeting at police headquarters, Emma told Michael that she had learned the SOS signal from her older brother Tom, who was a scout leader. She had remembered Tom explaining that military personnel would recognize distress signals, which was why she had specifically tried to communicate with the Queen's Guard rather than regular tourists or passers-by. The reunion between Emma and her family was deeply moving for everyone present. Her parents were amazed by their daughter's quick thinking and bravery in such a terrifying situation. Emma's ability to remain calm and seek help had not only saved her own life, but had also rescued 29 other children who might otherwise have disappeared forever. Dr. Helen Richards, a child psychologist who worked with trauma victims, evaluated Emma and the other rescued children. She was impressed by Emma's resilience and maturity in handling the crisis. This child demonstrated remarkable presence of mind under extreme stress, Dr. Richards reported. Her actions show exceptional courage and intelligence that undoubtedly saved lives. The investigation continued to uncover the full extent of the trafficking operation. Police raids in several other locations resulted in additional arrests and the rescue of more children who had been abducted in previous operations. The criminal network had been far more extensive than initially realized, with connections to organized crime groups across Europe and beyond. Michael's commanding officers faced a difficult decision regarding his future in the Queen's Guard. While his abandonment of his post was a serious breach of protocol that couldn't be overlooked, the extraordinary circumstances and positive outcome complicated the usual disciplinary procedures. The case set a precedent for how military personnel should balance duty to protocol with moral obligations to protect civilians. The formal inquiry ultimately concluded that while Michael's actions constituted a technical violation of his duties, as a Queen's Guard, the exceptional circumstances justified his decision to prioritize the safety of endangered children. The board recommended that he receive official commendation for his role in exposing the trafficking ring, while also implementing new protocols for guards who believe they are witnessing crimes while on duty. Emma's story became a symbol of hope and the importance of trusting children when they report being in danger. Child protection advocates used her case to highlight the need for adults to take children's distress signals seriously, regardless of how unusual the circumstances might appear. Her courage and quick thinking had proven that even young people could play a crucial role in fighting crime and protecting other victims. The warehouse district where the rescue had taken place became the focus of increased law enforcement attention, with authorities discovering that several other buildings in the area had been used by criminal organizations. Emma's SOS signals had not only saved the children on that particular day, but had also helped to expose a much larger criminal operation that had been threatening the safety of children throughout London. 6 months after the rescue operation, Michael Harrison found himself in an entirely different role than he had ever imagined. The formal inquiry had concluded with a recommendation that changed not only his career, but also established new protocols for the entire Queen's Guard regiment. Rather than being dismissed from service, Michael had been transferred to a newly created position that combined his military training with child protection work. The Palace Security and Child Safety Initiative was established as a direct result of Emma's case, recognizing that the Guard's unique position made them potential witnesses to crimes and emergencies. Michael became the first liaison officer between the Royal Guards and London's Child Protection Services, training other guards to recognize signs of distress and providing them with clear protocols for reporting potential crimes without abandoning their posts. Emma Morrison had recovered remarkably well from her ordeal, thanks to excellent psychological support and the love of her family. She had become something of a local hero, with schools throughout London inviting her to speak about safety awareness and the importance of knowing emergency signals. Her story was featured in Scout handbooks as an example of how their training could save lives in real situations. The trafficking ring that had been exposed through Emma's brave actions continued to unravel as international investigations progressed. Over 40 children from various countries were ultimately rescued, and the criminal network was dismantled across multiple nations. Interpol credited Emma's quick thinking and Michael's decision to act as the breakthrough that had allowed them to expose the entire operation. Margaret Thornton, the woman who had posed as a teacher, received a sentence of 25 years in prison for her role in the trafficking scheme. During her trial, evidence was presented showing that she had been involved in the abduction of children for over 3 years, making Emma and the other rescued children some of the last victims of her criminal career. Detective Inspector Sarah Collins was promoted to Chief Inspector in recognition of her handling of the case and her work in exposing the broader criminal network. She often cited the investigation as an example of how civilian observations and quick police action could work together to protect vulnerable victims. The case became a model for how law enforcement agencies should respond to unusual reports of potential crimes against children. Captain Wilson underwent a significant change in perspective following the events. While he continued to emphasize the importance of military discipline, he also became an advocate for training guards to handle emergency situations involving civilian safety. He worked closely with Michael to develop the new protocols and became one of his strongest supporters within the military hierarchy. The engagement ring that Michael had been planning to give to his girlfriend, Sarah, finally found its purpose when he proposed to her during a ceremony at Buckingham Palace, where he received his commendation for exceptional service. Sarah, who had supported him throughout the inquiry and career transition, accepted enthusiastically. Their wedding was attended by Emma and her family, who had become close friends with the couple. Emma's brother Tom, the scout leader who had taught her the SOS signal, expanded his safety training programs to include more comprehensive instruction about emergency communications. Scout groups across the United Kingdom adopted new curricula that specifically addressed how young people could seek help when they found themselves in dangerous situations. Tom often told other scout leaders that his simple lesson about distress signals had ended up saving dozens of lives. The Morrison family established a charitable foundation focused on child safety education and supporting survivors of trafficking. Emma, despite her young age, became actively involved in the foundation's work, speaking to other children about trusting their instincts and seeking help when they felt unsafe. Her natural charisma and powerful personal story made her an effective advocate for child protection initiatives. Dr. Helen Richards, the child psychologist who had worked with Emma and the other rescued children, published research based on her experiences with the trafficking survivors. Her work contributed to improved therapeutic approaches for children who had experienced abduction and trauma. Emma's case became a central example in training programs for mental health professionals who worked with young victims of crime. Lieutenant Thompson, who had supported Michael's decision to break protocol, was promoted to captain and took over many of Captain Wilson's duties when the older officer retired. Thompson implemented the new child safety protocols throughout the Guard units and became known for his progressive approach to balancing military tradition with modern social responsibilities. The warehouse district where the rescue had taken place was completely redeveloped, with the criminal properties being converted into a community center that focused on child safety education and youth programs. Emma attended the grand opening ceremony, cutting the ribbon alongside city officials and police representatives who had been involved in her rescue. 2 years after the incident, Emma was invited to visit Buckingham Palace for a special ceremony, recognizing civilians who had shown exceptional courage in dangerous situations. She met with members of the royal family who praised her bravery and quick thinking. The Queen herself spoke with Emma privately, commending her for her role in protecting other children and expressing pride in the guard who had risked his career to help her. Michael's new role evolved into a broader position within the Metropolitan Police, where he worked on developing training programs for all law enforcement personnel about recognizing and responding to signs of child endangerment. His unique background as both a military professional and someone who had personally witnessed the consequences of trafficking made him an effective trainer and advocate. The story of Emma's SOS signals and Michael's decision to break protocol became part of the training curriculum at military academies and police colleges throughout the Commonwealth. Future generations of service members learned about the case as an example of how moral courage sometimes required choosing between following orders and protecting innocent lives. Emma grew up with a deep appreciation for the power of individual action and the importance of speaking up for those who couldn't protect themselves. She eventually pursued a career in international law, specializing in human rights and child protection. Her childhood experience had shaped her understanding of justice and her commitment to fighting crimes against vulnerable populations. The friendship between Emma and Michael endured throughout the years, with the Morrison family remaining close to Michael and Sarah. Emma served as a bridesmaid at their wedding and later became the godmother to their first child. The bond forged during those terrifying moments at the palace gates had created a lifelong connection between the brave little girl and the guard who had chosen to help her. On the 5th anniversary of the rescue, a memorial garden was dedicated at the community center that had replaced the criminal warehouse. Emma, now a teenager, spoke at the dedication ceremony about the importance of courage, compassion, and the responsibility that everyone had to protect children from harm. Her words echoed the lessons that had emerged from her childhood ordeal and the heroic actions of a Queen's Guard who had chosen humanity over protocol. The legacy of that day lived on in the changed protocols, the rescued children who grew up safely with their families, and the reminder that sometimes the smallest gestures of courage could have the most profound impact on the world. Emma's desperate SOS signals and Michael's willingness to abandon his post had not only saved lives, but had also demonstrated the power of human connection and moral courage in the face of evil.